Hey everyone, welcome back to Around the Emirates podcast with Sara Mousa, where I speak to guests from across UAE about topics you want to hear about. Today I'm joined by Samantha Gregson, who's author of the book Before You Loved Me. Welcome, Samantha.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm so excited.
Thank you so much for being here. So, Samantha, I know that you are a spectacular communications expert, and of course, you've just released this new book. Please tell me your story and what inspired you to write this book.
Yeah, so my background was actually as a journalist. So I used to love telling stories, but not necessarily, in the novel sense. It was as my dream was to be a war correspondent. That was what I always wanted to be.
Okay,
I know. But
interesting.
it became apparent very quickly that I did not have the personality to be a war correspondent. I'm afraid of my own shadow. I'm incredibly risk averse, which is why I'm great in crisis communications. But the idea of sending me out to sort of a war zone, I think it became apparent for myself and then also for those that I was working with at Sky News that that was just not a good idea. And so I had to sort of then reevaluate my career plans because that was always the goal from being very, very young, from being about 12 years of age. Um, so I knew that I loved storytelling. I didn't really know at that time what the best way to explore that looked like. I found myself living in Qatar initially as a journalist. I'd got this little dog. I couldn't leave Qatar because he didn't have all of his paperwork. They said it would take about 3 months, and I had to find something to do in Qatar. And so I asked around my journalistic network, and people came to me and said, "Communications. It's there's overlaps. It's something that maybe you could explore in the short term, just to give yourself a little bit of breathing space until you get buddies, you know,
Yeah.
passport sorted, and then you can move overseas." And then I just love comms. I just found it really, really interesting. I like the idea of writing opinion editorials. I like the research element. I found that it fulfilled the desire to tell stories, whilst being very different to journalism and sort of exploring very different topics. There was also lots of overlap with the love of words, and that's what then led me into writing the novel. Is that was just another outlet to tell stories in new ways, and to explore my love of the written word. And the book is inspired by my little rescue dog, Buddy. So it feels weirdly, it's very interconnected. I think, my love of my dogs, the love of storytelling, and it all came together with Before You Loved Me. So it's very close to my heart for a number of reasons.
That is beautiful. So I understand that it took about 2 years for this story to come together. So talk to me about the
Yeah.
process, kind of what are the challenges that you faced, and like what did you find most satisfying about it?
Sure. So I knew I wanted to write. I'd written a book previously, and to be honest, had a huge confidence crisis when it came to actually sharing it with potential agents and publishers. So I've
Hmm.
actually got another book that no one has really seen, because I think the more I would read it, the more I'd become sort of obsessed with the idea that it was terrible, and then quite embarrassed about sharing it with other people. And
Hmm.
so that was shelved. I wrote that about 10 years ago. And then I was working with the expo team. I was doing shift work, which weirdly meant that I had free time during parts of the day, which I previously hadn't. So I'd have mornings to fill, or then I'd have sort of, afternoons to fill if I
Hmm.
was on the early shift. And that became the perfect opportunity, I think, to give the writing another go. My parents had kept saying to me, "You need to write all of the funny stories about my dog Buddy down on paper. You need to get it down on paper. They'd be really funny children's stories." And I started actually writing the book for a teenage audience. That was who it was originally aimed at, and it was a much shorter story. And
Hmm.
it was almost like life lessons from the buddy dog. That was the sort of the concept, as it was going to be this little dog's sort of musings, and quite a philosophical way of seeing the world through this very vulnerable and quite innocent, um, these innocent eyes. So that was what I wanted to do, and that's how I started writing the book. And the more I got into it, the more I started thinking, okay, exploring a little bit more complex themes here. I went to the publishers and they loved the idea of the story, but they said this is not really a story that's suitable for the age group that I'd initially had in mind, which was that sort of 10 to 13-year-olds. And they'd also said as well as, at that age group, that it wouldn't necessarily resonate, but they thought that it would really resonate with an older audience. So we then reworked the book in mind that it would be for this older audience. And then obviously you're looking at a completely different length, a completely different story structure. So it then became this process of entirely remodeling what we had to then fit almost this new brief, which we thought would be much more meaningful. And for me, actually, it then enabled me to explore in a lot more depth some of the themes that we touched on, but I previously touched on, I would say, in a very top level and top line way, because it wouldn't have been suitable for the audience that I initially thought I was writing for.
Very interesting. So who would you say is your main audience now?
Now it's definitely, I would say it's that sort of, I would say anything from about 16 to 25. But to be honest, I mean, that was sort of what I had in mind, based on the themes in the book. But it's for all ages, it's for any adults, and I hope male and female. I think there's parts of the story that really resonate with everyone. There are some quite complex and quite difficult themes that are explored throughout it. It is about a woman who starts off leaving an abusive relationship. She's struggling to trust again. She has doubts whether she'll ever love again. And the way that she almost deals with that, the approach to dealing with it, is to take inspiration from her rescue dog and his story out of abuse. And the fact that although all of these awful things had happened to him, he managed to find resilience somehow. He managed to find hope, and he got his sort of happy ever after, as you can say. So it's almost about how in saving him, she then saved herself, and that's what I hope is the sort of the enduring message from that, is that in helping others we help ourselves, and loving others we learn to love ourselves. The relationship as well is explored through the human and animal connection, which, like I say, was really important to me. There is autobiographical elements to that particular connection. The main character is named after my dog Buddy, and it is based on how I imagine him to be if he had a voice. The types of musings and the life lessons are very much what I see in his behavior and his interactions. And his ability, I think, just to, like I say, to find that resilience from these very difficult situations, and to seek happiness in everyday occurrences and everyday life, and to find love and to I think heal from what was a very traumatic experience, and to find meaning in life again. So that was the sort of the overarching message, I think, of what I really want people to get when they read the story.
That is so beautiful. Like the fact that you turned something that was almost a little bit of a personal element for you, and you created something that you and yourself, I mean, I think we can all relate to some kind of conflicts that we have in our relationships, whether it's family, whether it's relationships kind of with significant others. There's always something to learn from, and just to have that message of hope is beautiful. And the fact that you've gone through this journey, obviously a couple of times, like you mentioned, you wrote a book around 10 years ago. What would you say has been something surprising or something different or unexpected that happened to you in the process of like writing this book? Do you feel like there was something you didn't expect to happen?
I think so. What I've noticed is that I think working on myself has been a core part of why this has been more successful than the previous attempt, because I think now I see myself in a much more sympathetic light. I've read the previous book before, and I was like, it's there's elements of it that need work, but on the whole, it was a great effort. I did a really good job, I think, for a 25-year-old who'd never attempted it before. And I think at the time I was so hard on myself, and I was my own worst critic. And I think that when I look back now, that prevented me from giving something a go that could have been great. I could have been enjoying I think the sort of the benefits and the joy that I feel now of having finished this project, I could have been experiencing this 10 years ago. The
Mm.
only thing that held me back was myself and my own perception of my abilities and my own inner critic. And that's what I would almost say, to everyone is you are your own harshest critic, and give it a go. Worst case scenario, the publishers or agents, or if it is a book you're writing, will say, "Oh, it's not for us." But that's the absolute worst case scenario, and it's worth a shot. And so I would say that the biggest challenge was, I think, being kind to myself. um, the biggest joy was, I think, overcoming that challenge. And I mean, even now, I'm a little bit nervous to read it all back. Like, I have it now in the physical print, and I'm a little bit nervous to read it back because I'm still a little bit scared that there's parts of me that will go back to that sort of old me and be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe people are going to read this. But I just have to focus on the fact that I've finished this project. I've achieved my dream to have a novel in print. um, it doesn't matter what other people think. There's always going to be people that love it. There's always going to be people that hate it. If you look at some of the greatest sort of creative works of all time, whether it's film, art, books, there's always a huge percentage of people that will say, I just didn't get it, not for me. And you just have to focus on the fact that you're happy with that finished product and it was the best that you could have done and you achieved what you wanted to achieve, and just try to silence out both your own sort of inner critic, and then also I think the criticisms of others. So that's, I think, being the challenging aspect of it.
That was a beautiful answer to that question, honestly. The fact that like there are so many elements I'm sure that were challenging in writing a book, especially when you have a full-time job and everything. And it's really
Mhm.
such a deep and meaningful book. But for you to acknowledge that like the what seems as a simple act of being kinder to yourself is actually much more difficult to overcome than it sounds.
Mhm.
So I love the fact that you brought out that mental health element of it as opposed to like the actual writing process, like
Yeah.
knowing that you are doing your best. This is the best you can do. You enjoyed
Mhm.
writing it. It was a fulfilling project. And quite frankly, no matter what you do, the fact that you would put the time and effort into doing it yourself, like who cares what everyone else thinks? Like you put something
Yeah.
out there. That is, you can
Mhm.
look back in 30, 40, 50 years and say, I wrote that. And like no one else can take that
Yeah.
from you. And you can be so proud of yourself for doing that.
Mhm. Exactly, and I think everyone can write. It's that, I think, finding or giving yourself the time to sit down and to actually do it, and then committing to the process. And it's like anything. It's the way when you want something enough, you'll find time for it. And I found, for me, the most difficult thing was to just prioritize the writing, because I would find any excuse in the book as to why I couldn't do it. It'd be, oh, the dog needs walking, that random cupboard needs cleaning up, and it was just procrastination techniques, really. And I just had to keep reminding myself that no one can do this for me. Um, I had to keep reminding myself of that end goal, which is, I want to have a physical book of mine in my hands, and the only way I can do it is to keep writing 1,000 words at a time. And it's just 1,000 words at a time, and you come to a point where I think you've written so many words that it would almost be a disservice to yourself to quit now. So you have to keep going. And once you get over that point as well, it does become, I think, mentally less tough. But
Hmm.
it's getting to that point where the goal becomes clearer, and you can feel it. You can feel the end of it and the end. But yeah, it's it's tough.
That is amazing. I mean, I think that you've done my job for me in this interview. You've nailed all my questions, and you even answered ahead. And I've really enjoyed talking to you. I do have one final question for you. You've touched a little
Yes.
bit on the advice that you have for the listeners. I'm
Mhm.
curious, as a published author, I'm curious about one thing. How would you describe that feeling of holding the first kind of hard copy or published copy of
Yeah.
your book in your hand for the first time?
Yeah. It's quite surreal. It would always reminded me of that sense of pride of when you're sitting your exams at school and you get your results paper. And it's almost like that, like you breathe a sigh of relief that all of the hard work, all of the cancelled lunch dates, the early mornings, the late nights, that it's paid off and it's done. And what I would say to everyone is for me, is that immense feeling of pride that you've done something for yourself. is just absolutely incredible. And it's worth all of the difficulties and the challenges, because it's not for anyone else. And and whether it does well or not is almost irrelevant. It's the fact that you've set yourself a really tough goal, and you've worked towards it, worked towards it, worked towards it. You haven't given up. And the fact that it is also physical as well is
Yeah.
amazing,
Yeah.
because I think it's very tangible. So that feeling was just like, whew, I'm done. I can relax now. Although now I want to do it again. I want to do it again.
Oh no.
I enjoy the process. Yeah, the process is weirdly fun in the end. It gives your life, I think, a focus. So you wake up every morning with a very clear focus. Um, and for me, that was great. I enjoyed writing. I enjoyed having that focus. I enjoyed working towards something. And I
Hmm.
think in our everyday working lives, we don't really have that as much, because it's not tangible, I think, and particularly in communications. You work on a really good strategy, but you're not in control of whether it gets implemented.
Yeah.
You write a really good, whether it's a press release or an op-ed, but then it's someone else essentially owns the words.
Exactly.
Um, there's something about this where it's very personal. You're highly involved in every part of the process. Um, and you're the only person that's part of the process from start to finish. Other people sort of come in and out, but you're the owner of that entire project. And there's something really quite fulfilling about that.
That is beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your story with me. I'm honestly honored to
Not at
have
all.
been to have spoken to you about this. It is pretty badass to meet someone who like wrote a book. Like, you're like the next J.K. Rowling, man. Like honestly, like
I
it is
wish.
it is quite an honor. And I've obviously kind of worked with you in the past, and I'm inspired by the just putting yourself out there, how courageous you are to have written a book about something that is not a subject that we talk about and study necessarily every day, which is why,
Mm,
I wanted to have you on the
yeah.
show. So thank you so much for your time,
Thank
Samantha.
you
And
so much. I really
yeah,
appreciate it.
it's been awesome. So everybody, you've heard the book. Where can people buy the book, Samantha?
So it's going to be available in bookshops across Dubai, from the 26th of September. It'll be online, in Amazon over the next few days. I'll have the links, yeah, on my personal Instagram. So,
Okay,
I
cool. So
really
I
hope
will
that people
tag
enjoy it.
Samantha. Awesome. I will tag
Thank you
you
so
and
much.
people can check it out.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. See you later. Bye.
Bye.